Don't talk, quiet
The
Omega
wine
saved the Alpha King
is
mid-feast,
poisoned.
after catching a scent no one else
Don't
could.
drink the wine.
The high ceiling stretched toward shadowed rafters, and the walls were decorated with banners of crimson and silver, symbols of a kingdom that had survived centuries of war. Tonight, the hall was alive with voices and laughter. Lords and ladies from faraway lands had gathered for the Feast of Peace, a celebration marking the fragile end of a long conflict between the warring provinces of Eldrath. King Kale sat at the head of the table, his presence drawing silence even amid the riot of color and noise. Broad-shouldered and tall, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes that seemed to pierce through the soul, he carried the weight of his kingdom with a quiet, undeniable authority. No one dared interrupt his gaze, no one dared challenge his judgment, not openly. He was a king feared by enemies and respected by allies, a man who seemed untouchable. Yet in this crowded hall he remained isolated. Even surrounded by nobles and their frivolity, Kale moved through the world like a shadow among candles, seen, yet untouchable. At the edge of the hall, moving almost as if she were part of the wall itself, was Leora. She was small, slight, and unnoticed, a quiet Omega whose life was spent in observation rather than action. Her eyes, pale as morning mist, flitted across the crowd. She wore muted green silks that allowed her to blend into the background. No one noticed her, not truly, except for those who knew to look closer, and perhaps that was the way she liked it. Leora had a gift, a dangerous, rare gift. She could sense things, faint, lingering traces in the air that others could not detect. A scent of fear or dishonesty, a shadow of magic left behind like smoke on the wind. And tonight, as she moved among the revelers, that gift screamed at her. There was something wrong. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A trace of dark magic laced with something ancient and cruel, twisting itself into the very air Kale breathed. Leora froze for a heartbeat, inhaling carefully. She knew the danger before she could even see it. Her heart began to race. In all her years, she had rarely felt a threat so immediate and close. The king lifted a goblet of wine, his eyes scanning the room with calm authority. No one noticed the shift in the air, no one noticed the faint pulse of evil twisting invisibly toward him, but Leora did. Without thinking, she moved closer. Her steps were silent, careful, each one calculated so she would not draw attention. She felt the eyes of a few courtiers on her, but they thought she was insignificant, as always. And in that invisibility lay her advantage. As Kale raised the goblet to his lips, the scent grew stronger, sharp and venomous. Leora's breath caught. She realized instantly what it was, a cursed poison, one so rare that it could only have been brought into the palace by someone skilled in old, forbidden magics. It was lethal, swift, and designed to be undetectable by anyone but her. She could not allow it to reach him. With trembling hands and a racing heart, Leora moved faster, pushing through the crowd with purpose. Her mind worked in frantic calculations. How do I stop him without causing panic? How do I alert him without drawing attention? She reached the edge of the king's side just as the goblet tilted toward his lips. Time seemed to slow. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with a force that surprised even her. Kale froze, eyes widening in shock. "You," he began, his voice low, commanding, but before he could finish, she shook her head slightly, urging him to trust her. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Who is this girl?" His instincts screamed at him to pull away, but something in her urgency, in her silent confidence, kept him still. He noticed the faint shimmer around her, the subtle tension in the air that only someone attuned to the world could create. The goblet tipped, spilling wine harmlessly onto the table, and the cursed draft was gone, thwarted. For a heartbeat, the room continued as if nothing had happened. The nobles laughed, oblivious, but Kale's gaze did not leave Leora. There was something in her, the way she had moved, the way she had acted, the courage to defy protocol and reach him when no one else would. Leora, for her part, felt her pulse hammering against her ribs. She had saved the king of Eldrath, and yet she could not allow herself to linger in triumph. She lowered her hand quickly, bowing slightly, her face calm though her mind raced. "You must not speak of this," Kale said softly, so softly that only she could hear. His tone was commanding, yet tinged with something unspoken, curiosity, perhaps even admiration. Leora inclined her head, swallowing the urge to speak. She nodded, letting her silence answer him. She knew better than to argue. She had learned long ago that her words often carried more danger than truth. The feast continued, but Leora could not enjoy it. Every movement of the crowd, every shift of shadow, every subtle change in scent made her pulse quicken. She sensed a disturbance, a whisper of something ancient and cruel moving through the palace. Someone had planned this attack, and someone still lingered, waiting. Kale's attention, meanwhile, did not return to the feast. He watched her from across the table, eyes dark with questions he could not yet voice. Who was she that she could sense what others could not? How had she known? And why had she saved him without hesitation, without fear, when everyone else had ignored the threat? A servant tripped nearby, spilling a tray of goblets. The clatter echoed through the hall, and Kale's focus snapped back to the present. But his thoughts remained tethered to her. She was an enigma, a shadow who had stepped into the light at just the right moment. And for reasons he could not yet understand, he felt connected to her. After the feast, the guests began to depart, leaving only the inner circle of the court. Leora moved quietly through the emptying hall, careful not to be noticed. But Kale stayed where he was, observing her retreating figure. He did not understand why, but he wanted to know her name. Meanwhile, Leora paused at a corner of the hall, pressed against the cold stone wall. She allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She had saved the king, yes, but the scent of danger had not vanished. It lingered like a shadow across the golden tiles. Someone in the court had orchestrated this. Someone close enough to reach the king's goblet, yet cunning enough to remain hidden. And that realization sent a chill through her spine. She had always lived in the shadows, never daring to step fully into the light. But the events of tonight had pulled her into a world she had never wanted to touch, a world of kings, of curses, of unseen threats that could strike without warning. And now, she had the attention of the most powerful man in the kingdom. Kale rose from his chair slowly, his cloak brushing the floor. His movement was deliberate, regal. He walked toward the hall's exit, his mind still occupied by the small, silent Omega who had dared to intervene in his life. Leora felt a sudden prickling along her spine. She sensed him watching her. She did not look up, not yet. She could not afford to, but in her chest her heart betrayed her, pounding in rhythm with the awareness that something significant had shifted. Outside the hall the night was calm, though the moon was obscured by clouds. The palace towers rose like dark sentinels against the sky, and a cold wind whispered through the corridors. Leora paused at the entrance, letting the cool air wash over her. Her hands still trembled slightly, and her thoughts were tangled with the events of the evening. Somewhere deep inside, she realized that this was only the beginning. The king was alive, but the danger was far from over. And she, small and unnoticed, had become a part of a story far larger than herself. And Kale was no ordinary man. He was more than a king. There was power in him, yes, but also something hidden, something fragile. He had looked at her with eyes that saw beyond the surface. And though she would never admit it aloud, something in her stirred at the thought of his gaze, the weight of it, the intensity and the curiosity that had lingered there. Tonight, the feast had ended, but the story was only beginning. And in the shadows of Eldrath Palace, two fates had entwined silently, like smoke rising into the dark, waiting for the day they would converge again. For now, she remained unseen. Yet in the quiet, Leora knew she had been heard. And that knowledge was both terrifying and exhilarating. The wind whispered through the palace towers. Somewhere, a shadow moved. And Leora, with senses sharper than any courtier could comprehend, knew that the night had not finished testing them. The first thread of destiny had been pulled, and when it tightened, it would bind both King and Omega in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The palace corridors were empty, save for the faint echo of servants clearing the last of the feast. Candles flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that danced like living things. Leora moved quietly, her hands brushing along the cool stone walls. The air smelled faintly of incense and cold iron, the scent of the palace after celebration. Her mind replayed the night's events over and over. She had saved the king. No one else had seen the danger, but she had. That realization both thrilled and terrified her. Thrilled because she had acted decisively, terrified because her life had now become entwined with someone far beyond her station. Kale was not just any king. He was Eldrath's alpha ruler, a man whose very presence commanded obedience, and he had looked at her differently. The memory of his gaze made her chest tighten. He had not scolded her, nor had he dismissed her actions. Instead, he had studied her, as if trying to unravel a secret he had not known existed. There was curiosity in his eyes and perhaps something else, something unspoken that stirred a quiet longing in her. She had never felt that before, not with anyone. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound behind her, a footstep. Leora froze, heart hammering. She turned to see Kale standing at the top of the stairs, his cloak brushing the stone, the shadows around him making him look almost larger than life. "You linger," he said, voice low, careful. There was no anger, only observation. I was checking that everything is secure," Leora said softly, not daring to meet his eyes fully. Kale's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. "You do not speak often, Omega." His tone was a statement, not a question, and it made her chest tighten further. "I prefer to observe," she admitted. She did not elaborate. Words had always been dangerous for her. Silence had kept her alive in more ways than one. He studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Observation can be a weapon," he said, "and you wield it well." "Do you understand the gravity of what you did tonight?" Leora nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." Kale's gaze softened for a fleeting instant. "Then you know that your life is no longer solely yours." The words settled over her like cold water. She had known it deep down, but hearing it spoken aloud made her stomach twist. Her life had been small, unnoticed, and careful. Now it was bound to a king whose enemies were as numerous as the stars in the night sky. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kale stepped closer, his boots echoing softly against the stone. "Then you will need to trust me." Leora swallowed. Trust was a fragile thing, especially when the world had taught her to rely only on herself. Yet something in him, the strength, the certainty, and the strange curiosity drew her forward. She inclined her head, a silent promise. "You will not speak of tonight," he said again, his voice firmer now. "No one can know." "I will not," she confirmed. Her voice wavered slightly, but she forced herself steady. He nodded once, then turned and disappeared down the corridor, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts. For days after the feast, Leora's life shifted quietly but irrevocably. She was summoned to the king's private chambers under the guise of administrative duties, though the truth was clear to her. Kale wished her close. She was not to be a servant or an observer, but a confidant, a silent partner in the unseen struggles of his reign. It was in these quiet moments, away from the eyes of the court, that she discovered the man beneath the king's armor. Kale was not cruel, though his reputation suggested otherwise. He was burdened, carrying the weight of the kingdom and a family legacy laced with shadows. Yet beneath his strength, there were cracks, moments of doubt, flashes of loneliness that even his fiercest guards could not penetrate. And Leora, with her quiet presence, began to fill those cracks in ways she did not fully understand. One evening, Kale summoned her to the library, a vast room filled with ancient tomes and scrolls, the air thick with the scent of old paper and candle smoke. He did not speak immediately. Instead, He gestured for her to sit across from him at a heavy oak table. "There is a danger," he said at last, voice low and steady. "One that has lingered for generations. It is not a threat the court can face openly. They would panic or worse, betray me." Leora listened carefully, feeling the familiar stir of tension in her chest. She had felt this danger before, the cursed magic that had tried to claim his life at the feast, but hearing him speak of it aloud gave it a weight that made her stomach knot. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "The royal line carries a curse," Kale said, his dark eyes shadowed with pain. "It is subtle, hidden, but it manifests in moments of weakness. It twists the mind, feeds the fear, and can turn the strongest men into monsters." Leora felt a chill. She had read of curses in the old tomes, of magic older than kingdoms themselves, but she had never encountered one so close, so personal. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "Can it be broken?" she asked. Kale shook his head slowly. "Not easily. Not by anyone alive today. Perhaps only with knowledge long forgotten, or a sacrifice the heart cannot bear." Leora understood in that moment that her role was not merely to save him from physical threats. She might be the only one capable of sensing and confronting this unseen enemy, guiding him through shadows that no one else could perceive. Days turned into weeks. Leora and Kale began meeting in secret, often in the library, sometimes in the moonlit gardens where no one could follow. Their conversations were sparse, their communication often through gestures, glances, or brief words. Yet each moment carried weight, silent confessions, shared understanding, a trust that was dangerous in a world where betrayal lurked in every corner. Kale found himself drawn to her in ways he had never experienced. He was a king, accustomed to power, control, and obedience. But Leora challenged him without speaking, moved him without intention. She was small, yet her presence commanded him. He began to feel emotions he had long buried: curiosity, respect, and something tender, fragile, and dangerous. Leora, too, felt the pull between them, though she did not name it. She had learned to keep her feelings hidden, to remain unseen. Yet Kale's presence stirred something within her, a longing she could not suppress, a sense of being seen for the first time in her life. One night, as the moon hung low over the palace, they walked in the gardens together. The paths were lined with statues of long-forgotten heroes, and the air smelled of night-blooming flowers. A soft wind rustled the leaves, and the moonlight cast their shadows long across the cobblestones. "You have a rare gift," Kale said quietly, breaking the silence. "Not many can see the world as you do, not many can sense what is hidden. And yet you carry it lightly, without arrogance." Leora's heart fluttered. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes directly. "It is all I have," she admitted. Kale stopped walking and turned to her. His presence was overwhelming, his gaze unyielding. "No," he said softly. "It is not all you have. You have courage, strength. Even if you do not see it in yourself, I do." Her breath caught. For a moment the world seemed to shrink around them, the palace walls, the shadows, the distant sounds of the city, all of it faded. There was only him and the quiet space between them, filled with tension and unspoken words. Before she could respond, a rustling in the shadows caught their attention. Leora froze, her senses alert. The threat that had lingered since the feast had not disappeared. Someone was watching, waiting, moving through the darkness. Kale's hand went instinctively to the hilt of his sword. "Stay behind me," he commanded softly, not harshly, and she obeyed without question. They moved forward cautiously, each step measured, hearts racing. Leora could feel the pulse of danger in the air, faint but undeniable. Her gift had never failed her, and it did not fail now. She sensed the approach of someone skilled, deliberate, a shadow that did not belong in the palace gardens. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Cloaked, hooded, silent. Leora's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the faint scent of the emissary who had attended the feast, the one who had smiled too easily, spoken too little. A spy, or worse, an assassin sent by a rival kingdom. Kale stepped forward, sword drawn. "State your purpose," he commanded, his voice echoing in the garden. The figure paused, then lifted a hand in acknowledgement. "I come with a warning," the emissary said, voice smooth, almost charming. "The peace you celebrate is fragile. The shadows you ignore are gathering. Not all dangers are visible, and some are closer than you think." Leora's pulse quickened. She glanced at Kale, who did not lower his sword. He trusted her to understand, to read the danger in ways others could not. She felt the weight of that trust pressing on her chest. The emissary's eyes flicked toward her briefly, then back to Kale. "The Omega knows more than you realize," he said cryptically, and without another word he vanished into the night, leaving only the faintest trace of his presence behind. Kale lowered his sword slowly, though tension still lingered in his stance. "He spoke in riddles," he murmured. Leora shook her head. "He is not riddling, he is warning. The danger is closer than we imagined, and he knows I sense it." Kale studied her, eyes dark and unreadable. For a moment silence hung between them, charged with unspoken truths and the weight of shared knowledge. "You will remain at my side," he said finally. "I will not let this shadow touch me, and I will not let it touch you." Leora nodded. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the strange, thrilling awareness that her life and her heart were now inextricably bound to the Alpha King. The threads of fate had pulled tight, and the palace, with its secrets and dangers, had become a world she could no longer navigate alone. The night deepened around them, the shadows thick and restless. Leora knew the truth in her bones. This was only the beginning. The court held secrets, the kingdom held curses, and the future held tests neither of them could yet foresee. But for the first time, she was not alone. And perhaps, in the silent spaces between danger and trust, a bond was forming that could endure anything. And somewhere in the darkness, the curse waited, patient, watching, ready to challenge them both. The palace was unusually quiet that morning. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Eldrath's throne room, casting long shadows across the marble floors. The air smelled faintly of wax and dust, but underneath, Leora could sense something else, something darker, coiled and waiting. Kale stood near the throne, gazing out at the courtyard below. His expression was unreadable, a mask he had worn for years, but Leora knew better. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted ever so slightly to the corners of the room. Something was wrong. "You seem troubled," she said softly, stepping closer. Kale did not turn to her immediately. "The curse is stirring again," he said finally, voice low and tight. "It grows stronger with each passing day, and I fear the palace itself is not safe from its reach." Leora's heart skipped a beat. She had sensed its presence before, but hearing him speak the words aloud made it real in a way she had never felt. "I can help," she said quietly. "I can feel what it touches. I can sense the threads it leaves behind." Kale turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "And yet it does not act on its own. Someone is feeding it, someone is guiding it. The danger is more than magic, it is ambition, greed, fear. And you are part of this now, whether you like it or not." Leora nodded, swallowing the nervousness twisting her stomach. "I will stay with you." Kale studied her for a long moment. Then he walked closer, closing the distance between them. "You have saved me twice already, Leora. Once at the feast, and once by simply existing, by being able to perceive what others cannot. But the curse, it will test us in ways we cannot yet predict. It will test trust, loyalty, and courage." Her fingers tightened at her sides. "I understand," she whispered, though in truth she did not fully understand. Not yet. The next days were tense. The court carried on with business and ceremonies, oblivious to the growing shadows. Kale and Leora worked in quiet corners of the palace, poring over ancient tomes, deciphering runes and tracing lines of old magic. Each step brought them closer, intellectually, emotionally, and in ways neither dared name aloud. Kale's eyes would linger on her for moments that seemed too long, and she would feel the warmth of awareness in her chest, as though their hearts spoke silently to each other. Yet the unspoken words carried weight, heavy and dangerous. Trust was fragile, and both of them knew that a single misstep could shatter it entirely. One evening, Kale summoned her to the palace crypts, a place few had entered in decades. The air was thick with the scent of earth and stone, and the torches cast flickering light that danced across the ancient carvings. "This is where the curse began," Kale said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Long before my reign, before this palace stood as it does today. The magic lingers here, tied to the bloodline, waiting for weakness to exploit." Leora shivered. The cold air seemed to seep into her bones, yet she felt the pull of something powerful and dangerous, drawing her closer to the heart of the mystery. "I can feel it," she murmured, closing her eyes briefly. Her senses reached out, brushing against the invisible threads of magic that twisted through the crypt like dark smoke. "It's here, stronger than before. Someone has strengthened it." Kale's eyes darkened. "Then we must act, and quickly. But doing so will demand more than courage. It will demand trust, trust in each other, and trust in the choices we make together." Leora nodded. She had never considered the weight of her own gift in such a tangible way. She had been an observer all her life, silent, unnoticed. Now she realized that her role was crucial, and the danger of failure was impossible to ignore. The following days brought subtle attacks, small, almost imperceptible disturbances. A guard found unconscious near the stables, a servant claiming strange whispers in the hallways, shadows that moved where none should exist. Leora sensed the presence of the curse in every corner of the palace, each incident a thread leading to a single truth. The threat was deliberate, and it had an orchestrator. Kale grew restless, pacing the halls at night, restless and burdened. Leora watched him from the shadows, feeling the pull of his tension, wishing she could ease it somehow. She longed to speak, to reassure him, but knew better than to risk revealing too much too soon. One night under the pale light of the moon, Kale and Leora stood in the palace gardens once more. The flowers released their nocturnal scent into the night air, mingling with the faint tang of the wind. Kale's eyes were dark, his jaw tense. "I am losing control," he admitted quietly, voice low but full of uncharacteristic vulnerability. "The curse, it twists my thoughts, amplifies anger I do not wish to feel. I fear I may hurt those I am sworn to protect." Leora stepped closer, careful not to overstep. "You are not alone," she said softly. "I am here, I will help you." Kale shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "It is not so simple. You are not just facing magic or enemies. You are facing me and the parts of me I hide even from myself. Can you trust me, Leora?" "Even when I am at my darkest." Her heart ached, but she nodded firmly. "I can, because I see who you truly are, not just the mask of the king, and I know that together we can face this." For a brief moment, his eyes softened and he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, almost reverent, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. Silence stretched between them, heavy with meaning, filled with words they could not speak aloud. Then a rustling sound broke the moment. Shadows shifted at the edge of the garden and Leora stiffened. Her senses reached out instinctively, an intruder, moving with purpose and caution. Kale's hand went to his sword and Leora moved behind him, ready to act. The intruder emerged from the shadows, a figure cloaked in dark robes, face hidden beneath a hood. Leora's stomach twisted. She recognized the scent, the emissary from before, the one who had delivered the cryptic warning. "You continue to meddle where you should not," the emissary said, voice smooth, almost mocking. "The threads you pull will break and the consequences will fall on more than one life." Kale stepped forward, eyes blazing with authority. "I will not be threatened in my own home. Leave now or face the consequences." The emissary's lips curved into a faint smile. "Consequences are inevitable, Alpha King. The curse will rise, and choices will be demanded of both you and the Omega who dares to interfere. Remember, the bond you forge may be the very thing that leads to ruin." Before Kale could respond, the figure vanished into the darkness, leaving only the lingering scent of shadowed magic behind. Leora inhaled sharply, her senses tingling with the residual threads of the curse. Kale lowered his sword slowly, eyes fixed on where the intruder had disappeared. His expression was unreadable, but Leora could feel the tension radiating from him. For the first time, he seemed unsure, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed anyone to see. "You saw it too," he said finally, voice low. "I did," Leora admitted. "He knows I can sense it. He is testing us, pushing us towards something." Kale ran a hand through his dark hair, frustrated. "Then we must prepare. The curse is no longer a distant threat. It moves closer with each passing hour. And soon, it will demand more than our caution. It will demand action." Leora nodded, the weight of their reality pressing down on her. Her gift had always been a tool for observation, for quiet intervention. Now it was a weapon and a responsibility, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Over the next few days, the palace became a maze of shadows and whispers. Leora and Kale worked tirelessly, deciphering old texts, tracking the faint threads of magic that twisted through the walls, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Their trust in each other deepened with each passing day, though the tension between them remained palpable. Kale began to rely on her instincts more than ever. Her quiet strength became a stabilizing force for him, grounding him when the curse threatened to overwhelm his reason. And Leora, in turn, found herself drawn to his vulnerability, the rare glimpses of the man beneath the crown and armor. Yet the danger continued to grow. Each night brought new disturbances, subtle but deliberate doors left ajar, whispered threats in the corridors, shadows that seemed to move with intent. Leora sensed the emissary's presence, a constant reminder that their enemies were patient and cunning. And then one night it happened. In the depths of the palace crypt, where the ancient magic lingered strongest, the curse revealed its first true manifestation. Kale's body tensed, his eyes flashing with unnatural light, and a wave of anger and confusion overtook him. Leora rushed forward, placing her hands on his arms, trying to steady him. "You must fight it," she urged, voice steady despite her racing heart. "I am here, trust me." Kale's gaze locked with hers, wild and conflicted. I cannot control it," he shouted, the words echoing against the stone walls. "Yes, you can," Leora countered, her voice firm. "I will guide you. You are stronger than this curse, Kale, stronger than any shadow." For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, a bond deeper than words formed. Leora felt the threads of magic brush against her senses, dangerous and potent, yet she did not falter. With a Herculean effort, Kale drew in a shuddering breath and pushed back against the surge of the curse. The unnatural light in his eyes faded, and he sank to his knees, exhausted but alive. Leora knelt beside him, placing a hand over his, grounding him. "You did it," she whispered. "You resisted." Kale's chest rose and fell rapidly. His eyes softened, filled with gratitude and something else, something unspoken that lingered between them, fragile and delicate. "Without you," he began, but did not finish. Leora shook her head gently. "We are in this together, always." And in that silent, powerful moment, they both understood that the path ahead would test them beyond anything they had imagined. The curse was not defeated. It was patient, cunning, and relentless. But the bond they had forged, fragile yet unbreakable, would be their greatest weapon. The crypt grew silent once more, but both Kale and Leora knew that the shadows were only waiting for the next opportunity. The war against the curse, and against unseen enemies, was far from over. And as they rose from the cold stone floor, the unspoken promise between them shimmered in the air. Together, they could face whatever darkness lay ahead. The palace was unusually still that morning, the usual hum of servants and courtiers replaced by a tense silence. Even the birds outside seemed to pause, as though aware of the weight pressing down on Eldrath. Shadows clung to the walls, long and restless, whispering secrets of dangers yet unseen. Kale walked through the throne room, his cloak brushing the marble floor with deliberate, quiet authority. He had not slept properly in days, the curse and its manifestations haunting his thoughts. But this time he was ready. He was no longer alone. Leora followed him closely, her eyes scanning the shadows, sensing the threads of dark magic that lingered like smoke. The bond between them had deepened over the past weeks, forged in shared danger and silent trust. She had seen Kale at his most vulnerable, and he had allowed her to see it. Their trust was a quiet force, stronger than any blade. "The curse grows stronger," Kale said, voice low, breaking the silence. "And I know who guides it. The emissary is no longer acting alone. They are here somewhere in the palace." Leora's pale eyes narrowed. "I can sense it," she whispered. "The threads lead to the east wing near the old council chambers. Someone is weaving magic to amplify the curse." Kale nodded, gripping the hilt of his sword. "Then we face them, together." The east wing of the palace had long been abandoned, its halls empty except for dust and shadows. As they entered, the torches flickered, casting eerie shapes across the walls. The air smelled faintly of smoke and iron, a warning of the dark magic concentrated in the area. Leora extended her senses, tracing the invisible currents of power. The emissary was close, cloaked in shadows, weaving spells to strengthen the curse. But Leora's presence disrupted the threads, her quiet energy steadying the unstable magic. Kale stopped in the center of the hallway, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Show yourself," he commanded. "Your tricks end here." From the shadows, the cloaked figure emerged, face hidden beneath a hood. The emissary's voice was smooth, almost mocking. "So the Alpha King walks into the heart of darkness, and the silent Omega follows, brave or foolish." Kale did not flinch. "Neither. We are prepared." Leora stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the emissary. "Your magic will not succeed," she said firmly. "We know your plans, and we will not allow the curse to control this kingdom." The emissary laughed softly, a sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Do you think words will stop the power you cannot even see? This is beyond kings and omegas. The threads of fate are older than this palace, older than your bloodline." Kale moved swiftly, blocking the first wave of dark energy with his sword, the metal humming as it met invisible force. Leora extended her hands, guiding the flow of the curse with her senses, untangling the threads as they tried to tighten around him. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows shifting and twisting as if alive. Leora's heart pounded, but she remained steady, channeling her gift. Kale's strength and determination grounded her, giving her courage. They moved as one, King and Omega, connected by trust and shared purpose. The emissary struck again, more forcefully this time, weaving the curse into a concentrated, malevolent surge. Kale's eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment the curse began to take hold, twisting his thoughts and inflaming his fear. "Focus!" Leora shouted, voice cutting through the haze of magic. "I am here, trust me." Kale's breathing faltered and he faltered, but then he met her gaze. In her eyes he saw unwavering trust, understanding, and strength. He drew a deep breath and pushed back, reclaiming control over his body and mind. Together their energy combined, his determination, her insight, and the threads of the curse began to unravel. The emissary recoiled, their face now visible beneath the hood. Sharp features, eyes cold and calculating, lips twisted in frustration. "You think you can defy destiny?" they hissed. Kale stepped forward, sword raised. "Destiny is not written by shadows," he said firmly. "It is forged by courage, trust, and the choices we make." With Leora's guidance, he struck a precise blow, not at the emissary but at the magical conduit weaving the curse. The threads of dark energy shivered, unraveling and collapsing in on themselves. Leora extended her hands, channeling the final strands into herself, dispersing them safely, her gift serving as a bridge to stabilize the collapsing power. The emissary's power faltered, their control slipping. Kale advanced, his voice resolute. "It is over." With a final surge of energy, the emissary vanished into a cloud of dark mist, leaving only faint echoes and the lingering scent of shadow. The hallway grew quiet once more, the oppressive weight of the curse lifting like a tide receding. Kale lowered his sword slowly, chest heaving. Leora stepped beside him, hands trembling but steady. The danger had passed, at least for now. "You were extraordinary," Kale said, his voice softer than usual. "Without you, I could not have resisted." Leora shook her head. "We did it together," she whispered. "I could not have done it alone either." For a long moment they stood in silence, the tension of the past weeks ebbing away. The shadows no longer moved against them, and the halls seemed empty, peaceful. Yet the bond between them was stronger than ever, forged in fire and trust. Kale reached out, hesitating only for a heartbeat before placing his hand gently over hers. The contact was electric, yet tender, a silent acknowledgement of their shared trials. "You are more than your gift," he said, voice low and steady. "You are my strength, Leora, and I—" He faltered slightly, unaccustomed to revealing emotion. "I have come to trust you in ways I have never trusted anyone." Leora felt warmth spread through her chest. She had never been seen like this before, not for who she truly was, not for the quiet courage she carried. And yet here, in the quiet aftermath of danger, she realized that she mattered to him in a way that transcended station, tradition, and fear. "I trust you too," she whispered, "more than I have trusted anyone." Their eyes met, and for the first time, words were no longer necessary. The silent connection that had begun weeks ago, the glances, the gestures, the shared danger, blossomed into something undeniable. Days passed, and the palace slowly returned to its routines. Yet the memory of the curse and the battle lingered, a reminder that vigilance was necessary. Kale resumed his duties, but he did so with a renewed perspective. Leora was no longer just an observer. She was his partner, his confidant, and a presence he relied upon. The court noticed the subtle change in him, though they could not understand it. Kale's decisions were steadier, more measured. His eyes, once guarded, held a spark of warmth when they fell upon Leora. And while they remained careful in public, their bond was visible to those who knew where to look. Quiet gestures, protective postures, and the unspoken understanding that they were allies in every sense of the word. One evening, as the sun set over the palace, casting long golden shadows across the walls, Kale and Leora stood atop the tallest tower. The city stretched out below them, peaceful and unaware of the darkness they had just survived. "You have changed me," Kale said softly, voice almost lost in the wind. "I have always believed power was enough, that strength alone could protect my kingdom. But I see now trust, courage, and quiet wisdom are just as vital." Leora tilted her head, her pale eyes catching the fading light. "And you have changed me too," she replied. "I have always hidden in shadows, afraid to be seen. But you have shown me that I can stand beside you, not behind you." He took her hand gently, turning it over to clasp hers. The gesture was simple, yet it carried a weight neither could ignore. In that moment they were equals, bound not by fear or hierarchy, but by mutual respect and shared experience. The wind rustled their hair, and for a heartbeat the world seemed suspended. The curse was gone, the emissary defeated, and the palace safe. Yet the trials they had endured had left an indelible mark, shaping them both into versions of themselves neither had anticipated. Kale spoke again, voice steady and calm. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. No shadows, no curses, no threats can break this bond." Leora nodded, a quiet smile touching her lips. "Together." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. From the heights of the palace, they could see the kingdom stretching toward the horizon, alive with possibility. The past weeks had been filled with fear, darkness, and uncertainty, but now there was hope. And in that hope, a new chapter began, for Kale, for Leora, and for a kingdom that had survived the shadows. They stood side by side, hand in hand, facing the vastness of the world with courage, trust, and quiet strength. The threads of fate had intertwined, binding them in ways stronger than magic, stronger than fear, stronger than any curse. And though the shadows might return someday, they would face them together, unyielding, unbroken, and united. For in the silent spaces between danger and trust, love had taken root, a love that did not need words to exist, yet spoke louder than any proclamation. The night grew still, the stars above like silent witnesses to a bond forged in fire, shadow, and quiet courage. Kale and Leora stood together, ready for whatever dawn might bring, knowing that together they could endure anything.